Alright, here are the games of pre-release for Ikoria. We have over here the Abzan deck, and over there we have the Mardu deck. We'll go ahead and play best of 3 for this pre-release battle, and we'll roll off to see who goes first. Abzan rolls a 10. Mardu rolls a 9. Abzan will choose to play first. We'll draw our opening hands. Abzan draws a Blood Curdle, Forest, Bristling Boar, Forest, Durable Coilbug, Imposing Vantasaur, and Extinction Event. I don't like this hand because we only have one of our 2 colors, and because of that, even with the Imposing Vantasaur cycling, because we can't cast the Bristling Boar at a good time, we will take our first mulligan. Now we draw a Forest, Deadweight, Gemrazor, Skull Prophet, Cavern Whisperer, Forest, and Bristling Boar. We have the same problem again, and this time we don't even have a spell that we can cycle, and so we're going to mulligan again to see if we can at least draw one hand where we can cast something on turn 2 or 3. Now we have an Excavation Mole, Forest, Indatha Crystal, Almighty Brushwag, Durable Coilbug, Migration Path, and Skull Prophet. This has exactly 1 land, which is not going to be enough to work. I think we're going to lose if we don't mulligan again, so we're going to go down to 4. And now we have a Jungle Hollow, a Plains, a Swamp, Night Squad Commando, Indatha Crystal, Skull Prophet, and Almighty Brushwag. I think that this is finally a keepable hand, and so we're going to put 3 cards on the bottom, and I think we are going to be taking the Indatha Crystal, since we have all of our colors, the Skull Prophet, since we have all of our colors, and the Almighty Brushwag, because it is not terribly good at the moment, and put those on the bottom. And then we're going to hope that we can somehow survive with 4 cards. Mardu draws a Swamp, a Mountain, Rooting Moloch, Plains, Deadweight, Fire Prophecy, and Windscarred Crag. I think this is an excellent first hand, so we will keep it. Turn 1, Abzan will play a Jungle Hollow. This is a land. It enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. You can tap for black or green. It'll enter the battlefield tapped, will gain a life to go up to 21, and then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu draws, gets a Nethroy, Apex of Death. We'll go ahead and play the Windscarred Crag first. This is a land. It enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. You can tap it for red or white. It'll enter the battlefield tapped. We'll gain a life to go up to 21. And then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps. We draw a Forest. We will play a Swamp. And then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps. We draw a Zenith Flare. Mardu will play a Swamp, and then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan draws a Gemrazor. We'll play a Plains. We'll tap all 3 of these. And then we'll play a Night Squad Commando. This is a 2/3 human soldier. When it enters the battlefield, if you attack this turn, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. We did not attack this turn, and so we just have a 2/3, and then we'll pass the turn. At the end of the turn, Mardu will tap the Windscarred Crag for red in the Swamp and cast Fire Prophecy, targeting the Night Squad Commando. This is an instant. It says Fire Prophecy deals 3 damage to target creature. You may put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library. If you do, draw a card. This will go into our graveyard, and then we will take a Deadweight and stick it on the bottom of our library, and we will draw a card. We draw a Will of the All Hunter. This destroys a Night Squad Commando, which dies, and then Abzan's turn is over. Mardu untaps, draws a Pacifism. We will play a Plains, and then we will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws, gets an Almighty Brushwag. We'll play a Forest. and then we'll tap everything, and we will cast the Gem Razor. This is a 4/4 beast with mutate 1 green, and with reach and trample, and whenever this creature mutates, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. And then we'll pass the turn. At the end of the turn, Mardu will tap the plains and the swamp, and then we will use the cycling ability of Will of the All Hunter. We'll discard it and we'll draw a new card, which is a Sovel Triome. And then Abzan's turn ends. Mardu untaps, draws a Checkpoint Officer. Mardu will play the Savai Triome, which is a land. It's a mountain plain swamp. It enters the battlefield tapped, and you can cycle it for 3. And then we'll tap 2 more mana to cast the Checkpoint Officer. This is a 1/2 human soldier with 1 white tap target creature. And then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps. They draw a Migration's Path. We'll go to combat and we'll attack with the Gem Razor for 4. Mardu cannot block. We'll take 4 and go to 17. Then Abzan will tap the forest and cast the Almighty Brushwag. This is a 1/1 Brushwag with trample, and for 3 and a green, it gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws a Vulpikeet. Mardu will play a mountain. We will spend 4 mana and cast the Vulpikeet. This is a 2/3 Fox Bird with mutate, 2 white and flying. Whenever this creature mutates, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then we will attack with the Checkpoint Officer for 1. Abzan declines to block and will take 1 to go back to 20. Mardu will pass the turn. At the end of Mardu's turn, Abzan will tap 2 mana and cycle the Migration's Path. We'll discard it and we'll draw a new card, which is an Excavation Mole. Then Mardu's turn ends. Abzan untaps. We draw a Durable Coilbug. And then Abzan will go to combat and attack with the Brushwag and the Gem Razor. Mardu declines to block, and we will take 5 to go to 12. Then Abzan will tap 3 mana and cast the Excavation Mole. This is a 3/3 mole with trample. When it enters the battlefield, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. We will mill a Migration's Path, a Forest, and a Blood Curdle, and then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps. We draw a Plains. Mardu will play the Plains. Mardu will attack with the Vulpikeet for 2. Abzan cannot block, we'll take 2 and go to 18. Mardu will follow up by tapping 5 mana and then casting the Rooting Moloch. This is a 4/4 lizard. When it enters the battlefield, exile target card with a cycling ability from your graveyard. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. We will exile the Will of the All Hunter, and it will be able to be played until the end of my next turn. And then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws, gets a forest, will play the forest. Abzan will attack with the Gem Razor and the Almighty Brushwag. Mardu will offer a trade with the Rooting Moloch. Abzan accepts the trade. Mardu will take 1 damage from the Brushwag to go to 1, and will lose the Rooting Moloch. Abzan will lose the Gem Razor, and then Abzan will spend 2 mana and cast a Durable Coilbug. This is a 2/2 insect, and for 4 and a black, return it from your graveyard to your hand. And then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps. They draw a Rumbling Rockslide. Mardu will spend 2 mana and cycle the Will of the All Hunter. We'll draw a Grim Dancer. Mardu will attack with the Vulpikeet for 2. Abzan takes 2 and goes to 16. Then we'll spend 3 mana to cast the Grim Dancer. This is a 3/3 Nightmare, and it enters the battlefield with your choice of 2 different counters on it from among Menace, Death Touch, and Lifelink. We will choose it to have Death Touch and Menace. Mark that with a black and a red. And then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws a Swamp. We will hold the Swamp, and we'll go to combat, and we will attack with the Almighty Brushwag. Mardu will decline to block. Abzan will tap 4 and pump the Brushwag. Mardu takes 4 and goes to 7, and Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws a swamp. We'll play the swamp, and then we will tap everything to mutate Nethroy, Apex of Death. This is a 5/5 legendary cat nightmare beast with mutate 4 green, white, black, black, and has Death Touch and Lifelink. Whenever this creature mutates, return any number of target creature cards with total power 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This will mutate on top of the Vulpikeet, and so it now has flying, and we'll put this on top as a 5/5, and whenever this creature mutates, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So now it is a 6/6 Death Touch and Lifelink, and then we're going to return any number of creatures with power 10 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. That is just the Rooting Moloch that will enter the battlefield. This will cause the Will of the All Hunter to be exiled once again. And then we will go to combat, and we will attack with the Grim Dancer for 3. Trading the Excavation Mole and the Durable Coil Bug for the Grim Dancer doesn't seem like a good idea, so we'll take 3 and go down to 13. Then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws a Honey Mammoth. We'll play the Swamp, and we can't really attack, and it seems pretty bad here, but we will tap out. We'll cast the Honey Mammoth. This is a 6/6 elephant, and when it enters the battlefield, you get 4 life, taking us back up to 17. And we will decline to attack for the time being, and we will pass the turn. Mardu untaps. They draw a mountain. We will play the mountain. We'll tap 4 mana, and we'll cast the Rumbling Rock Slide. This is a sorcery. It deals damage to target creature equal to the number of lands you control. We control 8 lands, and we'll deal all that damage to the Honey Mammoth. The Honey Mammoth goes down. We will tap 2 more mana to use the cycling ability of the Will of the All Hunter. Discard, and we'll draw a Boot Nipper. And then we'll tap 2 more mana and cast Pacifism, which is an aura. It enchants creatures. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. And we'll stick this on the Durable Coil Bug. The Coil Bug has been pacifismed. And then we'll go to combat. We will attack with Nethroy, the Grim Dancer, and the Rooting Moloch for 13 damage. This seems to be a pretty bad place. We will double block the Grim Dancer for trades. The Almighty Brushwag and the Excavation Mole will die, and we will take 10 damage to go down to 7. The Grim Dancer will die, and then we'll gain 6 life from the Nethroy's lifelink to go back up to 13, and then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws, gets a Deadweight, and Abzan will spend 1 mana and cast the Deadweight, targeting the Checkpoint Officer. Deadweight is a aura, and it says Enchanted Creature. Enchanted Creature gets -2/-2. This will immediately kill the Checkpoint Officer. The Checkpoint Officer dies. Then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws a Swamp. We will go to combat, and we will attack with Nethroy and the Rooting Moloch for 10 damage. Abzan takes 10 damage and perishes. We'll go to sideboarding if there is any, and we'll be right back for game 2. We are back for game 2, and Abzan will choose to go first again and hope they don't have to mulligan into oblivion. Go ahead and draw our opening hand. Abzan draws a Cavern Whisperer, Back for More, Skull Prophet, Honey Mammoth, Jungle Hollow, Plains, and Blood Curdle. This is a little low on lands, but the Skull Prophet might get us there, even though it is a bit of a fat hand, but we're going to keep it because going down to less has turned out to be pretty bad for Abzan. Mardu draws a Memory Leak, another Memory Leak, a Swamp, Savai Triome, Insatiable Hemophage, Will of the All Hunter, and the Plains. I think that we have enough cycling here to make this one work, and so we will keep this hand. Abzan will begin by playing the Jungle Hollow tapped. We'll gain a life to go up to 21, and then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu draws a Yidaro Wandering Monster, and then we will play the Savai Triome tapped, and then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, We draw a swamp, we'll play the swamp, we'll tap the swamp for black and the jungle hollow for green, and we'll play the Skull Prophet. This is a 3/1 human druid, and you can tap it for black or green, or you can tap it to put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. And then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws, and gets a swamp. We will play a swamp, and then we will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, we draw an Evolving Wilds, and we will play the Evolving Wilds. This is a land. You can tap it and sacrifice it to search your library for a basic land card. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. We can't cast any of our 4 mana spells, so we'll go ahead and play it, sack it immediately, and we'll put this into our graveyard, and we'll go hunting for a green mana. There's a forest, we'll put it onto the battlefield tapped. We'll shuffle. Then we'll go to combat, and we'll attack with the Skull Prophet. Mardu will take 3 and go to 17. Then Abzan will pass the turn. At the end of the turn, Mardu will tap 2 mana and cycle the Yadaro Wandering Monster. This has a particular ability. This is an 8/8 legendary dinosaur turtle with trample and haste and cycling 1 in red. And when you cycle Yadaro Wandering Monster, shuffle it into your library from your graveyard. If you cycle the card named Yadaro Wandering Monsters 4 or more times this game, put it onto the battlefield from your graveyard instead. We'll shuffle this in. We draw a Routine Moloch. Then Abzan's turn will end. Mardu untaps. We'll draw a mountain. We will play the mountain, and then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps. They draw an Extinction Event. Abzan will play a Plains, and then Abzan will spend 4 mana and use the mutate ability of the Cavern Whisperer. It's a 4/4 Nightmare, and it has mutate 3 and black, and has menace. Whenever this creature mutates, each opponent discards a card. This will go over the Skull Prophet, making it a 4/4 with menace, and it still has its existing abilities. Because the Cavern Whisperer mutated, Mardu will discard a card. Mardu will discard the Will of the All Hunter. Because the Cavern Whisperer entered the battlefield this turn, it has Summoning Sickness and cannot attack, and so Abzan will pass the turn. At the end of Abzan's turn, Mardu will tap a mountain, and it will cycle a Memory Leak. We'll draw a Yadaro Wandering Monster, and then we'll tap 2, and we will cycle Yadaro Wandering Monster again. We'll track that we have gotten to 2 cycles already. We'll shuffle this in. We'll draw a Plains, and then Abzan's turn will end, and Mardu will untap. We draw a Nethroy, Apex of Death. Mardu will play the Plains, and then Mardu will tap 4 mana and cast the Insatiable Hemophage. This is a 3/3 Nightmare with mutate 2 black and Death Touch. Whenever this creature mutates, each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. And then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws, gets a Bristling Boar. We'll go to combat, and we'll attack with the Cavern Whisperer for 4. Mardu takes 4 and goes to 13. Abzan will spend 4 more mana, and we will cast a Bristling Boar. This is a 4/3 boar, and it can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. And then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps. We draw a Fire Prophecy. We will play a Swamp, and then we will spend 5 mana to cast the Rooting Moloch, and then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws a Swamp. We'll play the Swamp. We'll go to combat, and we will swing with the Bristling Boar. Mardu will trade the Rooting Moloch for the Bristling Boar. The Rooting Moloch dies. The Bristling Boar dies. And then Mardu will tap everything and cast a Honey Mammoth. We'll gain 4 life to go up to 25. And then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws a Swamp. We'll play a Plains, and then we will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws a plains. We'll play the plains, go to combat, and we'll attack with everything for 10. Mardu will tap 1 mana and cycle the Memory Leak. We'll draw a Lava Serpent. We'll spend 2 mana and cycle the Lava Serpent. We'll draw a Stormwild Caprador, and then we will take 10 damage and go to 3. Abzan will hold and pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws a Zenith Flare, we'll play the Swamp, and we'll tap all 7 mana to mutate Nethroid, Apex of Death, onto the Insatiable Hemophage. In response, Abzan will tap 4 mana and cast Blood Curdle, targeting the Insatiable Hemophage. This is a instant. It says destroy target creature, put a menace counter on target creature you control, and we will put the menace counter on the Honey Mammoth. The Insatiable Hemophage dies. This means the Nethroid Apex of Death will just appear as a 5/5 Death Touch Lifelinker, and then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws a Greater Sandworm. Abzan will go to combat with both menace creatures and swing for the win. Mardu cannot block and will die. We will be back for one more game to determine who the winner is. If there is any more sideboarding, we will show that as well. For game 3, Mardu will opt to go first. We'll draw our opening hands. Mardu draws a plains, a swamp, a memory leak, deadweight, insatiable hemophage, and a rumbling rock slide. I think that we can keep this on the power of cycling and deadweight to help us to survive until we can cast this hemophage and hopefully eventually draw a rumbling rock slide. So we will keep this hand. Abzan draws a forest, a skull prophet, a swamp, a greater sandworm, a swamp, a night squad commandos, and a cavern whisperer. I think this is an alright start, so we will keep it. Mardu will open with a swamp, and Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan draws an imposing Vantasaur, and will play a swamp, and Abzan will pass the turn. At the end of the turn, Mardu will tap the swamp and cycle the memory leak, drawing a mountain. Then the turn ends. Mardu untaps, draws a plains, will play the plains, and then Mardu will pass the turn. At the end of the turn, Abzan will tap the swamp and will cycle the imposing Vantasaur, drawing a Skull Prophet, then we'll untap. Abzan draws a bristling boar. We will play a forest. We'll tap the forest in the swamp and cast the Skull Prophet. And then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu draws a Savai Triome. We will play the Savai Triome tapped, and then we'll tap the swamp and we'll cast Dead Weight, targeting the Skull Prophet. That will kill the Skull Prophet. The Skull Prophet dies. Then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws an Excavation Mole. Abzan will play the swamp, and then we'll tap 3 mana and cast the Excavation Mole. We'll mill 3. We mill a Gem Razor, a Migration Path, and a Plains. And then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws a Zenith Flare. We'll play the Mountain. Then we'll tap everything to cast the Insatiable Hemophage. And then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws an Evolving Wilds. We will play the Evolving Wilds and we'll sacrifice it, searching for a Plains. Here it is. We'll put it onto the battlefield tapped. We'll shuffle. We'll go to combat and attack with the Excavation Mole. Mardu will take 3 and go to 17. Abzan will tap out and we'll cast the Night Squad Commando. Because we attacked, we're going to create a 1/1 human creature token. We'll use this dice to indicate that. And then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws a Plains. We'll play a Plains. And I think we just need to hold my opponent off for a bit. So we'll tap 4. And we'll cast Rumbling Rock Slide, targeting the Excavation Mole. The mole dies. And Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, Draws a Migration Path. We'll spend all 4 mana to cast Migration Path. This is a sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. We'll go grab a forest and a swamp. We'll put them onto the battlefield tapped. We'll shuffle. And then we will pass the turn. Mardu untaps. We draw a swamp. We'll play the swamp, and Mardu is going to hold the cards and pass the turn. Abzan untaps. Draws a forest. We'll play the forest, and then we'll spend 2 mana to cast the Skull Prophet, and then we will spend 4 mana to cast the Bristling Boar, and then we will pass the turn. Mardu draws, gets a Vulpikeet. We will play the Plains and we'll tap 3 mana, and we will mutate the Vulpikeet onto the Hemophage, putting the Hemophage on top. And then this will double trigger the 2 mutate abilities, putting a +1/+1 counter on here, and then draining for 1 because it was 1 mutation, making this a 4/4 flying death touch. We'll gain 1 life to go up to 18. Abzan loses 1 life to go to 19. We can't attack profitably, so we will hold and pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws a forest. We will play the forest, and then we will spend 4 mana and mutate the Cavern Whisperer onto the Bristling Boar. We'll put the Cavern Whisperer on top, and that means that this cannot be blocked because it has both Menace and Bristling Boar's ability. This will force Mardu to discard a card off the mutate trigger. Mardu will discard Plains, and the Cavern Whisperer is summoning 6, so we will pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws a Rooting Moloch. Mardu will spend 5 mana to cast the Rooting Moloch. We will exile the Memory Leak from the graveyard, and then we'll spend 1 more mana to cycle it again, drawing a Splendor Mare. Then with a blocker on board, we'll attack with the Insatiable Hemophage for 4. Abzan takes 4 and goes to 15. Then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws a Blood Curdle. Seems pretty good. We will attack with the Cavern Whisperer for 4. That's basically unblockable. Mardu goes to 14. Abzan will spend 7 and cast the Greater Sandworm. This is a 7/7 worm. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, and it's cycling 2. And then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws a swamp. We'll play the swamp, and we'll tap 3 mana to cast the Splendor Mare. This is a 3/3 Elk Unicorn with lifelink and cycling 1 white. When you cycle Splendor Mare, put a lifelink counter on target creature you control. We can't really attack through what our opponent has going on, so we are going to hold here and pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws an Extinction Event, and then we'll spend 4 mana to cast Blood Curdle, targeting the mutated Insatiable Hemophage, and we'll put the counter on the Greater Sandworm. The Hemophage dies. Abzan goes to combat and swings with everything. We'll double block the Greater Sandworm, and we'll take 10 damage to go to 4. These will trade. We'll gain 3 life from the Splendor Mare, so we'll go back up to 7. The Sandworm dies. And then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws a Flourishing Fox. We will tap 1 mana and cycle the Flourishing Fox, getting a Nethroi, Apex of Death. Can't quite cast that, so now we will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, draws a Deadweight, and then we will go to combat and swing with everything. In response, Mardu will tap the Mountain, 2 swamps and a plains to cast Zenith Flare, which is an instant. It deals X damage to any target, and you gain X life, where X is the number of cards with cycling ability in your graveyard. We have 3 cards with cycling in the graveyard, and we will target the Skull Prophet, dealing them 3 damage and getting us 3 life. We will take damage from the remaining creatures to take a total of 7, so we'll take 4 additional damage, taking us down to 3. Abzan loses the Skull Prophet, and then Abzan will pass the turn. Mardu untaps, draws a swamp, will play the swamp, and then Mardu will pass the turn. Abzan untaps, we draw an Almighty Brushwag, and we'll just go to combat and swing with everybody for the win. Mardu has flooded out, and so Mardu will die, and we'll lose the game with the Nethroi in hand. And that is it for the pre-release for Ikoria. Since we couldn't play this in person, this is the closest thing that we're going to get. And so I can't really judge that this has been significantly worse than the other pre-releases because it doesn't actually count as an official pre-release. I think the set plays pretty fun in sealed, so that's a plus, and getting the cool treatments for the art is also cool. And I'm just glad that I was able to play with this set in the midst of the pandemic. So that's going to be it for me and the Ikoria quasi pre-release pack sealed decks. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of these videos, you can hit subscribe. Let me know what your Ikoria pre-release experience was like during the pandemic in the comments below. But this was Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.